Welcome to our next episode where we create one tracking plan a day. And today we will create one for Vimcal. Vimcal is a calendar app that you can use on your Mac and your iPhone. Not sure. They might also be available for Windows and other things, but this is the setup where I use it. Yesterday, I did one recording for Superhuman, and one of the things that was interesting for me was to really think about what is the core promise of the product first, if there's one. And then think about, okay, can this influence the direction how we build the whole analytics setup? And so I'm trying this here today as well, and I will also try it in all the future videos. Sometimes it's obvious. Yesterday it was pretty easy for Superhuman, at least for a long time. They had inbox 0. I think they shifted now a little bit to, okay, you can save a lot of time when using us. I took the inbox 0 one because it was a little bit easier. And so let's have a look here, what we can find here. Vimcal says it's the calendar for people who have too many meetings. Luckily, I'm not someone with too many meetings. But I can definitely see how they play into or how they work for this kind of audience. And so we will get into this a little bit when we're describing the different kind of use cases and what you can do with it. Well, let's keep this in mind. Vimcal works really great when you have a lot of meetings, where I personally would say you really have a hard life, because like my life would be too hard if I have too many meetings. But it also works pretty well for people with not too many meetings, because in the end, and this again comes to the same thing, is it tries to do things very efficient. You don't have to spend a lot of time managing a calendar. And then obviously if you have a lot of meetings, this just adds up. But it's even nice for me with just some meetings that I don't have to spend a lot of time managing meetings. We will look into this when we define everything. What we want to create here is a first step. We create the tracking plan with thinking about what kind of analytics use case we might have beyond the tracking plan. A tracking implementation where let's say we track specific kind of events by itself naturally is pretty useless because you just collect some random data. We always should keep in mind that at some point we will make some analysis. Analysis by itself is also like use. In the end, we always have to connect the results or the data points that we collect to how our business is approaching growth. What are the different kind of strategies that we are running? And to really then see, okay, with the data that we collect, how does it connect to this? To achieve that, I use a framework that I have developed myself and I have written about in my book. And so here is the book, the Analytics Implementation Workbook. I have a framework which is called the double three-layer framework, which I will explain a little bit when we talk about the implementation. The main 3 layers we're talking about, interaction events, which track how we interact with things. Which button do we click? In which input field we might click? Where do we add things? Really like how people use our application. This is often how people approach tracking when they do the first tracking setups. To be honest, this is the way how I approached tracking for 5-6 years when I was starting out with product analytics. You open up the application, you check, okay, where can people actually click? What are important clicks? You reduce it to that. This is your baseline. The problem with that is it's pretty far away from how people actually use a product. It's easy to track how people click a product, but using a product is something different. 2-3 layers up there. You have to zoom out to get there. And then if you zoom out even more, you get to the customer or the business layer. And here we are looking into how does product usage reflect on customer success. And so I'm trying to walk you through all this in the upcoming video now. And so what we will do is we will use my workbook as reference, and we're using this in Claude. The interesting thing is what I found out is like when you take my book and when you buy my book, you get a mini version. And the mini version is smaller. It's not optimized for reading. It's optimized that you can put it in any kind of Gen AI model. And so when you use this and you create a tracking plan, you usually get a first draft of tracking plan that is quite close to how I would create a first draft of a tracking plan. And so this is super interesting for me, and it enables me to create this kind of video where I'm more focused on how do I actually work after the first draft. Because when I create an initial tracking setups, I have different stages I walk through. The first stage is I collect a lot of information about the product, about the company, again, like about, for example, what is the big promise of the product, but then also about use cases. Then in the second phase, and this is what we will do now with Claude, is I create a first draft. I basically do a brainstorming session, usually with myself, and I just draft out how I would actually approach tracking. Then in the next phases, I refine it. And the refining is very important. And this is what we do today as well. Usually when I refine it, I trying to get rid of things which I think are not essential when we really get started. I really want to get started with the most comprehensive approach possible, because everything that we implement requires work, requires maintenance. Yeah, we have to be careful with that to really keep in mind what we actually really need. With all this refactoring, I go through all the different kind of steps. And then in the end, we have a tracking implementation that I can discuss with developers, how we approach it. We will not get there. I will prepare stuff for the implementation, and I will share. For example, I have an open GitHub repository where I have all the documentation that I would share with developers. There are also some JSON schemas if the developers want to do some event validation in the event data pipelines. But this is the nerdy side of things. Today, we are talking more about the design task to find the right kind of events that we want to track. So I prepared it already. On the past, I recorded this, let's say, this whole process live, but I learned yesterday when I had to do re-recording that it actually works a lot better when I already have prepared everything, because it gives me more freedom to explain things. Therefore, I already did a full run where I created a first draft and did one refinement already. And so I will now walk you through all this. Again, this is no prompt magic what we are doing here, because I'm not a person who would spend a lot of time to figure out how to best prompt. This is something that, I don't know, doesn't really work well with me. So in the end, I want to speak, or I want to put my input in that I would also input when I would do this task manually. And the major thing what I did here is, so first of all, I added in the promise that call has. Yeah, so it works wonders for people with too many meetings. Let's see if it really picks this up. And then here in this block, I describe all the different kind of use cases. And this is an important part. When you create the thing with any kind of Gen AI model, or if you create it manually, you always need this. If you create an analytics setup, the first thing that you have to make sure, or let's say, if you create a product analytics setup, the first thing that you have to make sure that you can distill the core use cases, the core jobs to be done that this product is currently offering. And the emphasis is on core. Especially, I look here, for example, I had Notion as the first one. Notion has been growing different kind of circles of features and possibilities. But still, if I would have to create the first analytics implementation, I would focus on the middle. What are the core things that make Notion? After that, I might go broader and would think about it. You have to write down the core use cases that your product has. Here, for example, we can create an account, we can set up subscription, there's a trial period, then I can connect a calendar account like a Google Calendar, then I can create calendar entries or events, and so I can add a conference tool to this event, I can add people, I can invite them to the meeting, then invitation is sent out. Another thing that at least in the beginning, that was setting Vimcal apart, is I can select slots in my calendar that I can offer someone to book a call with me. Besides having predefined slots, I can really go individually and can say, okay, by the way, here on Friday, you can use this one. And then it generates a text that I can send to this person. I also added the possibilities that you can create actually booking links that I can just send to people where they can then just pick a slot and book some time with me. So I added all this. One thing, because I prepared it, I could do in the way how I usually do this. maybe this is a tip for you if you work with Gen AI models in this. I speak this text. I don't actually write this. I, for example, use a tool called Super Whisper. There are plenty of others who do the same thing. In the end, what they're quite good at is they record what you talk, and they then quickly create a polished transcript. The important thing here is really polished. I can do breaks when I think about things, and it just removes the silence part. And then also, like, it removes repetition and other things that happen when you just don't think about a lot, when you just ramble on. This works really well. I can highly recommend, if you work a lot with this, to use this kind of approach, especially like later when we talk about the feedback that I gave on the first draft. I went through the whole document and I recorded it while I went through it, which gave me the freedom to just make a break, read something, even reasoning a little bit about back and forth. Should I do it like this? Should we do it like that? And then in the end come to a specific result, because the models usually can take this input and can understand where I end up and then use this as a really good feedback. This is why it's a lot of text here. So I didn't write this. It would look different if I would write it. Okay, so that's what I gave into. Now it takes my book as context, because like I have added it to the project. And now it creates a first tracking plan. Let's have a look on the tracking plan. Again, what it does is first it defines the product entities. First, we look on the product layer. The product layer is where we define how people use the product. Again, the important emphasis is on using product, not clicking a product. This is why you will not see any granular stuff in here, copying a booking link or something like this, because this is too granular. We are not really interested in that. And when we look at the product layer, we break this down into entities, activities, and properties. Entity and activity both together defines the event. For example, like account created. There, the account is the entity and created is the activity. I like to split it up in entities because entities really help me to create a foundation for my measurement setup. And it helps me to create some restrictions and some borders for myself to not go crazy and to add too many events. I first define the entities, and then after I have the entities, I define the activities within the entities. Here are the entities that the model is proposing. It has account, calendar, event, booking link, integration. So the first one definitely makes sense. They're very standard ones. I like that it basically came up with the name event, because like when I was prompting it, I didn't have really idea how should I call this thing when I add something to the calendar. I think I call it calendar entry, but I like that it called event because, yeah, it is an event. Integration is something that I would already question. Maybe I would have added it to my own draft, maybe not, because so here it takes integration. So for example, I can integrate Zoom or Google Meet into Vimcal so that when I create an event, I can pick from them which it will be used to make the call. What it does then, it sends this out to Zoom or to Google Meet and then gets this unique link back and then adds the link to the invite, and then so that people can just open it up and can join me in this meeting. It's an integration, but for me, the integration is not core or not so important that I would use it as an entity. It passes the test that I usually have is if you would take this away, is it still the same product? I would say this is a hard case, because if I would take away the possibility to add Zoom links or Google Meet links, I would not use the product. It is definitely an essential feature within. It passes the first test that I usually have for an entity, but the second one is much more fuzzy. Does it feel right to have it as an entity? Is it important enough that it's there? And I don't think so. I would integrate the integrations, potentially here into account, where we could have an activity like integration added. And I would also have it as properties, for example, in the events that we can really see, okay, I have used, for example, Google or Zoom. So I would definitely want to get some feedback if people are using it, but for me, it's not big enough to become an own entity. But again, we're talking about design process. If the Vimcal team says, look, integrations is the big thing for us, we really pushing this, we do a lot more integration, it can make sense to have it as an own entity. because then it makes it easier for people to work with it because they immediately see it, they know where to find things and so on. In the end, again, this comes down to data user experience, which is a very important topic for me. You design your events for two purposes. First of all, you want to do good analysis that can create insights that can support decisions. This is the standard job of all things analytics that we do. But the other thing is we want to enable more people in our company to work with this kind of data because like we are not the masterminds that can come up with all the domain knowledge so that we can do these, I don't know, 200 analyses that will lead to a lot of great decisions. It's even more fun when people who are actually in this domain, like in marketing or product, can do the analysis themselves. But then our job is we have to prepare a setup for them that makes it super easy for them to get to these kind of insights. And this is a part of it. For example, if product is pushing a lot on integration, then I would go for having integration as an entity, because then when they go into an analytics tool, they will find, or let's say this block or this category of events about integration, and they can just find everything there and make their own, let's say, create their own insights. And I don't have to explain to them, but actually it's a property here, and then it's an activity there. And so with this, you can basically bake it together. It's harder to use for someone who's not using this every day. This is also an important aspect, which is often forgotten by this, that if you want to have self-service analytics, you have to make it as easy as possible for the people to do self-service analytics. All right. This is a side thing. Okay, let's look into the activities. We have the account entity and we have different kind of activities. We have created, we will get rid of updated. I definitely have to think about if I should include something in my book that tells rarely use updated as a activity. It can make sense, but in 10% of the cases. Often, if someone updates someone in their account, so for example, I changed my name, I don't know, I changed my time zone, it's not really important for, let's say, understanding how people use the product. There are cases where there are updates in an account that can be important. For example, my favorite example is when I have a mobile app and I need specific permissions to unlock specific features. If someone gives me this permission, this might be really important that I would say, hey, account update is important. I can, in account updated, I would pass on in the properties which kind of permissions have been given. That would be a case where I would leave it. In most of the cases here, I wouldn't leave it. Also, another thing, maybe I should also add this to the book because like it always comes up with this. I personally like to have a subscription entity. Because again, and I think I explained it already with all the other 3 videos, so sorry for the repetition if you watch the other ones. I want to have an entity that represents revenue, and subscription represents revenue, and therefore I want to have it as an own entity. You can perfectly put it under here, under account, if you don't really care about this. But I love to have subscription as an entity because revenue is important for most of the products, unless you are an organization that doesn't, let's say, which is not driving revenue, but then you have other driving forces. I want to have the output metrics represented here as an own entity. Therefore, I would give the feedback that I want to have subscription as an own entity. Then we look at the different kind of properties. I should also put potentially in the book that created at properties are cool in a data table, but in an analytics setup, often pretty useless because you cannot really work with the properties. There might be outlier tools where you can put in a date and do transformation on the date. Here, for example, my standard example is account created days ago would be something that is more meaningful because I translate it to something that is easier to use in an analysis. Again, I would change this. Account time zone. I was really thinking about this. I like that it came up with this kind of idea and I might keep it in. Time zone definitely are not unimportant in a calendar app, but I'm not really sure if this property is really giving us any kind of value. But it might. I would put a question mark behind it and would discuss it with the developers how hard it is to put it in. If it's pretty easy because it's in the same payload anyway, I would say, yeah, let's go for it. Let's write it away. If it's hard to get, I would say, okay, we don't have to do this. Then we have some calculated properties like the number of calendars and the number of integrations. This definitely makes sense. We could even include, so for example, when we get rid of the integration entity, we could then also include account integrations, and then there we can just have a list of the integrations that are used in this account that we can then later filter down in any kind of analytics scenario that we can, if we want to really know, okay, how many accounts do we have that are using Zoom, then it's pretty straightforward to analyze this. I would add this as well. Then we look into calendar activities. Yes, it can be connected, disconnected. I would get rid of synced. We had synced already yesterday in the video about Superhuman. I think we solved the problem of syncing calendars into an app. I rarely have a problem that the sync is not working. I think this maybe was something in the past where you always had this, you could see if it was syncing or not. This has been solved. We don't have to track this. This is also like why we don't really need calendar last sync. One thing which is really interesting is like calendar source. Obviously, I can have my calendars, which like here represented Google Outlook, but I can also import calendars from other people. For example, I can import all Champions League games. I think I had this in the past, which is quite useful. Then therefore, this is like an external source. It can still be represented here. Also, we could have it, let's say, as a calendar type, not just, I'm not even sure what secondary would be. Maybe we could replace secondary with external ones. We just subscribe, or subscription, for example. Then, for example, here, read level already incorporates this as well. For example, specific calendars that I just import or subscribe to, I obviously just have read level, and by that I can also see this. Last sync doesn't make sense, and not really interesting. Okay, event can be created, can be, we have the updated again. I would not care if someone updates an event. I think it doesn't really tell us a lot about product usage. It could have some hints in there. If we would discover in updated that a lot of people are adding a conference tool later with, let's say, more people add a conference tool with updated than they do with created. This could give us a signal that in the creation process, it's not clear enough that you can add a conference tool. But this is an outlier. And you really have to be lucky that you find out something like that. Therefore, yeah, I put a question mark behind it. Maybe keeping, but it would be a candidate to get rid of it. Yeah, deleted totally makes sense. Invitations sent, I would still track this as a single event. You could also have it with event created and then have it in the properties if there were invitations to send out. I think it also, yeah, it has something like this in the properties, but I still like to have it as an own event, and I can tell you why, because it's an important viral event. The nice thing about calendars, and that's something what Vimcal does as well, and it works also the same with emails, is so you can use the old Hotmail trick, which they all do, where you can put in a small created by Vimcal thing into the invite. And so Vimcal does the same thing. I think you can switch it off, but I was so far too lazy to do it. Therefore, if you share an invite with other people, it's an opportunity for Vimcal to, yeah, trigger with someone that they want to check out what this tool is. Therefore, invitation sent is an important event. And so this is why I want to have this activity as a standalone activity. Video conference added, by the way, is not an important activity. It might be if this is a new feature where we now, let's say, something like Google Meet or Zoom was not really present so far, is not standard, then obviously this can make sense that you really want to track when someone adds a video conference because you're pushing for it. Here, we just have it in the properties. We don't need the activity here, so we get rid of that. Again, interesting, let's say, what kind of properties do we need? Event type, meeting appointment, hard to tell. I'm not really sure if you can really tell something like that. I would be more interested in an event type between if I have created it or if someone invited me. This definitely gives me an interesting two categories because like it really tells you if you are driving your calendar or if other people driving your calendar. You could have three things, like you could have invited and created that someone just booked time with you. This could be in three really interesting categories I would really love to see. Duration, definitely interesting. Also like interesting, Vimcal does this, that they send you some stats on a weekly base to tell you how much time you waste in meetings. And this would be the requirement. You need to have event duration in there to make this kind of calculation. Number of attendees, again, interesting. Also like with the thing about, okay, how much viral impact we do. So if we have a meeting with 20 people, we send out our link to 20 people. We can hook up 20 people potentially. Has video, could be interesting. It's maybe property. Video provider, definitely interesting, especially if we get rid of the integrations. Then created source, this goes back to the event type. If we have covered the scenarios good in event type, then maybe the created source is not so important, but we might still can keep it in. I still like to have something like to really know, okay, does it come from the API? I'm not even sure if they have an API. And import is interesting because, I could import a calendar. Event status obviously is also interesting, and recurring interesting as well. These are good properties. Okay, then the booking link. The booking link is really like an essential feature in Vimcal. I think that it was the one that made me aware of the tool. And so they go for many meetings. What is most annoying about many meetings? Not to create the calendar event, obviously to figure out when to do the meeting, when everyone has time. It incorporated most of the features of typical booking link tools like Calendly. It incorporated the same thing. It has its own special spin where you can pre-select your slots in the calendar and then send it out. But in the end, it's the same. It's also like a booking link that you send out. Yeah, we want to create a booking link. Again, we don't care if a booking link has been updated. At least I would say. I cannot see a scenario where this would be interesting. Deleted, at least we want to know how many. It's also not super interesting to know how many booking links have been deleted. Yeah, but let's keep it in there for the sake of completeness. But again, if we want to reduce activities, this would also be a candidate, because if a booking link has been deleted, it comes down to most of the deleted events to be true. If an account has been deleted, this has an impact for us. This is an important deleted one. But for example, if an event has been deleted or not, doesn't tell us something about the product. It just tells us something about what the person's life is, but if they're deleting a lot of events. But it doesn't really tell us something about the product. Interesting thing about, we are coming to maybe about event updated. Event moved could be interesting. So I put a big question mark, because moving could be an interesting pattern to at least analyze. I think it doesn't have a big product impact, but if it makes it easy to move things, which by the way you can do here, because like in all the invites you have this possibility that when someone books a meeting with you, they can also move it when actually they don't have time, which is then easier that I have to move it. Okay, event updated maybe still can get a comeback here when we look into moving. Okay, anyway, we are here at booking links. Then we have viewed. This is important, like how many people view the booking link. Again, advertisement for the product. And then slot selected is also important to really see if people figure out how they can use it. Okay, then we have different types. This link type doesn't really make sense. One-off, recurring team. I think I never use. I'm not even sure if you can even do this. Here, more link type would be more if it's a custom selection or if it's a booking link, because I have these two different ways how I can share my availability. I would put this into the link type. Duration is interesting. Availability patterns also interesting. If I just use my standard working hours, I have a custom one. Yeah, everything else makes sense if I want to collect some more context about it. Integration, we got rid of it. So now let's move on to the customer layer. The customer layer, as I said already, sits on top of the product layer. And it basically describes how specific product use case activities are translating to customer success. And so what we usually do is we usually describe a customer journey from, okay, they're starting out, they're getting the first value, they're getting more value, they become pro users, they start using our product, and then at some point they really go out. And so here we have it. Like the first value moment will be created when someone creates their first event and invitation has been sent out. And attendees bigger than one. It could also be included as well, created a first booking link. I, for example, used the product initially because I wanted to get rid of Calendly, or basically I wanted to combine two products. I had a calendar app and I had Calendly, and I wanted to just merge it. We could also like have an or statement here, created a first booking link, or shared availability. Maybe we have 3 ways how we could define a first value moment, but this is the nice thing. We can make up our own rule sets how we define a first value moment. Adoption success makes sense to then basically say, okay, you got this first one, now do you start to repeat it? Do you start to adopt the product? So again, so like here we increase the, let's say, the threshold a little bit, what has to be done, created 5 events in 7 days, and booking links created. I would not go for created here, I would go for shared, because you potentially don't create so many booking links, but you share them a lot. And sharing is, I think, more powerful than just creating the things. And this, for example, you can then also package in a time period. For example, first value moment, you could say this has to happen in the first 7 days. If not, we are most likely have lost this user. Adoption success, you can say, has to happen in the first 30 days. So that they basically do all this. Here we say in 7 days. We could also go for a higher number in 30 days. You have to play around with this. You have to analyze the data. This is the good thing. You start out with the product layer events, and with this you can already analyze if you see these kind of patterns, and from there that you do the abstraction on top to create the customer activities. Power users, obviously, like adoption, but more, and repeating. So here again, we are introducing moving windows. We look, okay, last 7 days, last 30 days, depending a little bit on how your product works. In this case, I would also go for last 7 days, because weekly usage definitely makes more sense. It's a more high usage. It's not as high that you look on a daily base. There are products where looking on a daily base can make sense, but you really have to have a product where you check it out every day. Calendar is somewhere in the middle. It could be a daily tool, but I would go for weekly cadence here. At risk means so we detected adoption or power user at some point in the past, let's say look back window 90 days, but in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we couldn't see any kind of activity. This could be normal because people just taking a time off, but it could also be a first indicator that we are starting to lose these people. This is why we have this at risk. Churn prediction is not really like churn prediction for me. I would more introduce something like dormant. Dormant is when at risk basically became true. People were active far in the past, let's say 200 days ago, or in a period of 200 days, but haven't been active in the last 6 or 8 weeks. Then we can say, I guess we have lost this user. This is especially interesting if they still have a subscription, because then we can be pretty sure that we lose this subscription at some point too. All right, so this is the customer layer. Now, if we look under the product layer, we have the interaction layer, as I mentioned before. Interaction layer, we use a catch-all approach to just track interactions. Like here we have element clicked, so this is the best catch-all that you can get. You just triggered when someone clicks somewhere. Sometimes it's important, for example, if the UX designers add a new flow, how you can create booking links. They might want to know in a specific field where you can pick some options, how do people actually click on this different kind of options to really understand, besides user tests that they obviously will also do, to get some quantitative data, how people actually using this different kind of options. I would never put this in a normal product layer because like it would create too much noise, and it's also not really relevant for product use cases because you're more interested in the end result than how people get there. But if you really want to learn how people get there, then you can use this one where you have element clicked as one event type, and then you add a lot of context in the properties that makes it easy for you to identify that these are actually clicks happening in this kind of place. This is what you have to make sure. I would love to add another interaction layer, which we already also had when we were discussing Superhuman, which is like keyword shortcut used, or yeah, something like this, because Vimcal also is very heavy on keyboard shortcuts. This is also like why I like it, because like with some quick shortcuts, I can just get a booking link, copy it, and then yeah, get it, just can paste it somewhere. This takes me 20 seconds. And so I would love to track this automatically on the interaction layer as well. There, for example, we can ask the developers to get an event listener every time a keyboard shortcut has been used. We're just writing this away with this for this one very generic event. This really helps us. Okay, so this is all the feedback that I gave. Again, first draft. This is, I think, still a good first draft. It needs some refinement. As I said, I usually do 2, 3, 4, sometimes more if the thing is more complex, to really refine the things. And then when we look into, let's say, so I gave a lot of feedback here. This is basically what I just told you here. Again, I didn't write it. I recorded it because, yeah, I didn't want to write so much stuff, and I would forget things when I start to write it. And so then it created a new version. And as you can see here now, for example, as customers, we have introduced dormant. We got rid of the integration entity. We got rid of, ooh, it sneaked in integration connected. I think I mentioned it somewhere. I think that is fine. That we now have an account integration connected. One there, we can also see if we get Zoom or Google Meet connected. Yeah, so I think I got rid of all the update ones. Where still now, let's say if I do my next revisit, I might come back to it and say, yeah, maybe email updated. Okay, so this is how I create the tracking plan for it. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to add them to the comments. If you like the video, please the video. It helps other people to find it. If you want to watch more, so this is video number 4. We have 16 to go. We are again still building 16 tracking plans. If you want to see what we are building, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There are also links in the description for everything important. There is a link to my book if you want to try the same thing with Claude or ChatGPT. You can buy the book there. You can also just read the book and then do the same thing just on Miro. There will also be a link to a blog post that describes the things more in details. In the blog post, you can then find some links to a Miro board where I have all the different kind of tracking designs. If you just want to have a Miro board with, in the end, 20 tracking designs, check this out. And there will also be a link to GitHub repository where you can find all the JSON schemas for the tracking design that we just discussed. And yeah, with all this said, see you in the next video.